I'm Brendon Batson of the Football Association. They say that homophobia is the last taboo in football. Well, here we are at the changing rooms at Wembley, and I'm joined on my right by Ady Williams, former Reading captain, also played for Wolves and Coventry and Wales. And on my left here, John Scales of Wimbledon, Tottenham, Liverpool and England. And we're here to discuss what they say is the last taboo in football. Is it really as bad as we think? What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think homophobia, as you say, is sort of one of the last taboos in football. Football, as we all know, is a very harsh environment. I think as a player, you know just what it's like stepping into the dressing room when you're a young player, and to confront personal issues within that dressing room is very difficult, whether it's because of your colour, because of issues at home, whether it's because you're gay. It's very, very difficult, I think, to imagine that players find that easy, and therefore homophobia is a big, big issue for us in society generally. Homophobia in football is even more difficult because it's such a difficult environment. You've got a dressing room with maybe 20, 30 players, young lads, and I think the confidence of some to speak out in that environment, let alone with their family and their friends, and to come out to them, then I don't think it's any surprise that it is one of those issues that's way underground for them.
But you played, John, in a team known as the Crazy Gang at Wimbledon, and everybody had the impression of a very strong-minded group, a very macho environment. Do you think it possible that a player who felt almost compelled to talk about his sexuality could survive in that sort of dressing room environment?
I think they'd have found it very difficult. You're talking, 20 years ago, Wimbledon, it was a great place to be. I learned everything about the game and myself, being part of that dressing room. It was brutal, it was honest, it was frank. In some ways, there was a great honesty about the place. And I think, had there been a gay player in that dressing room and he'd come out, he might well have been surprised by the reaction or reception that he would have had. But the fear of not knowing quite what would come of, exposing yourself in that way, I think would be very, very difficult for a player to contemplate. And I think that's the same for most dressing rooms around the country. Now, I think today, you fast forward where we are today, I think society generally is just, for me personally, it's an irrelevant topic, as in the sense that I don't have any prejudice against somebody being gay, if they're black, if they've got personal issues at home or whatever else. I take everybody as I see them and consider everybody the same. So I personally don't have an awareness that it's such a relevant issue. And I think today, with society generally and the acceptance that we have so widespread about so many issues, that it's almost one of those prejudices that people have when they are themselves fearful, or they have this herd mentality to jump on a bandwagon or hide behind their insecurities, that they have a problem with it.
But if we turn, Ady, to one of your fellow countrymen and turn to a different sport in rugby, not so long ago, a very high-profile player came out in Gareth Thomas.
Yeah.
What was the reaction? What was your personal reaction when you heard about that?
Well, Gareth Thomas, Welsh rugby legend. I think he's, capped 100 times by Wales. He was the captain of Wales, and I think he came out in 2009 and retired in 2011. So he continued playing for 2 years, and it must have been, such a relief for Gareth, because his profile become greater. When you're a legend, a Welsh legend, I think it helps, and there was no reaction, was there? It wasn't like a massive thing. I agree with John saying about the dressing room environment is brutal, it is harsh. Everybody thinks of the Crazy Gang, the Wimbledon days, but most dressing rooms are very similar. And maybe it's not the same in rugby union, rugby league, cricket, other sports, but in football, I think it's got easier. I do believe it has got easier, and John's talking about society as well. But, Gareth came out, and like I say, I don't think it was a problem. And if you asked him, I would imagine it was huge relief, and he would have been absolutely delighted, I think, with the acceptance.
We also had another high-profile sportsman in cricket, Stephen Davis, first-class cricketer. He came out. And again, I don't think that received what I would perceive to be adverse publicity. Rugby, cricket, football, do you think rugby and cricket have a different culture in terms of their supporters, etc., than football has?
Possibly, yes. I think the mindset is possibly different. Let's be honest, football is still the best watched sport in the world. So the profile of footballers are so much greater than rugby players, even the top rugby players like Gareth Thomas and top cricketers. You know, it's still the number one game, football. So I do believe the mindset of the supporters of these other sports are different, and maybe the mindset of the actual individuals, the actual sportsmen as well.
Could you define that, John? What's the difference between a rugby crowd and a cricket crowd as opposed to a football crowd, who maybe, and a football crowd would be less supportive of a player or an official who came out?
I think it's a lot to do with habits. I think a football crowd go and they expect to support their team incredibly. It's a tribal, it's, you know, the greatest contest, you know, with so many people in the stadium. So I think from that basis, there's the chanting abuse is almost what you do when you go to a football for so many people. And the amount of times I've seen fathers standing on the terraces with their son or daughter, and the father's chanting abuse in front of the child, and you think, well, hang on a sec, I know exactly what they're going to do when they grow up, because they just think that is normal behaviour. Yeah. And so that's why it's got to change. They've got to be, that father or mother or whoever it is has got to be ejected. They've got to have action taken against them. People around them have got to say that's absolutely not tolerated. Cricket and rugby have a different audience. They go there and don't expect to chant abuse from the sidelines. It's not sort of part of the habits of going to watch those sports. So it's a very, very different environment.
Do you think a football environment is conducive to somebody, if they feel they wish to come out and say, look, hey, that's my sexuality, but I'm a good player, what's the problem?
Absolutely. You know, I agree exactly what you say, Brendon. I think the problem is on the terraces in the stands. You know, the thousands of people that come into these football matches week in, week out, they do tend to voice their opinions. And if you look over the last few years, you know, certain rumours of high-profile footballers being gay, you know, the abuse that they took was unbelievable. You know, it was horrendous, really. And I think, you know, we were talking earlier about mental strength. I think you've got to be really, really strong to get through that, you know, particularly when such, you know, amount of people are voicing their opinions.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a good point. But the issue is, I think, you know, if a football player comes out, the story is, with all due respect, is 20 times bigger and more relevant for the media than if a rugby player and a legendary figure like Gareth, you know, it's still going to be small in the media profile, considering that.
But what
I agree,
the first
it's the
one?
terraces. The issue
But
is
what
a
role do
rugby
you
crowd
think?
are very different to a football crowd. Yeah. You've got 40, 50,000 people who, I think, you know, the minority who chant abuse for whatever reason at games, and it is a small minority, but the voice is very, very highly heard. There's an ignorance, but there's also, they almost feel they have a right to be able to chant abuse at a football match. That mentality has got to change, and I think it is changing. It's certainly with the racism issues, it has changed. So I think the acceptance from people around in the crowd, they won't tolerate it so much. That's got to continue. Fundamentally, though, I think football players have got to be well educated. I think we need the support of high-profile players to say, you know what, if somebody comes out gay in the dressing room and makes that public, so what? We will not care. We won't be bothered by it. It's not going to be relevant to us. It's about how he performs on the pitch, how good he is. Yeah. No issue for us.
But
so I think that's going to be, it's not going to be put to the crowd.
We feel that, but would every professional footballer think the same as you?
Well, they need to be educated, because I think we don't live in a society that we were 20, 30 years ago where that could be tolerated.
But when I think back, just as a comparison, when I think back to the anti-racism campaign, which started off in '93, bearing in mind black players have been coming to the fore since the mid-'70s, the role the players had to play in that, in making it a success, not just the black players, but the white players, was very, very important in embracing the ideals of the anti-racism campaign and expressing that to the wider public. What role do you think current day players at every level have to play in trying to make sure that this is a proper environment for people to express their individuality?
I think absolutely crucial. And it comes back that I think the players nowadays have got to accept that responsibility, that they have a platform to change society for the better, for the good. And so that if high-profile players understand the issues and they are prepared to embrace it, that sets the perfect example for society generally. We always hold up role models of the players. They have a great responsibility, but it's about educating them, because I think when you take a player out of their comfort zone, which is playing football, and you put them in an environment where they haven't been briefed, or I've seen it a million times. If you're briefed and you understand it and you talk through it, they have the confidence to speak eloquently about it and speak with confidence about it. And they say there's no issue. That filters both ways. I think there's got to be a message to fans, society, everything else, and it's also got to come from the players, and you build momentum about changing the whole perception of the issues.
I think high-profile footballers nowadays have more influence on youngsters than politicians, or entertainers, rock stars, whatever it may be. You know, so I totally agree.
When we look back and we talk about this issue, you know, Justin Fashanu, sadly, great player in his time. I think the first black British player to go for £1 million. And he came out and wasn't really accepted, had to go through a lot. And we all know the result of what happened. He didn't come out in his, you know, in his heyday, but later on, as he was looking to sort of resurrect his career, do you think a Justin Fashanu coming out now, there would be a different reaction than what we experienced going back to the late 80s?
Definitely, yeah, 100%, without a doubt. I mean, John touched on society.
And why do you think that? Why?
I think knowledge, education as well, a lot to do with it, acceptance, you know, and I couldn't see it being anywhere near the same, Brendon, at all, to be honest. And you know, at football clubs nowadays, you know, football players are human beings. You know, they do have pressures of everyday life. You mentioned to somebody about a professional footballer, they instantly say, well, they get well paid, they're pampered, this, that and the other, you know, it's the usual reaction. But, you know, there is pressures out there. And at football clubs now, you know, at Reading, the club that I work with closely, they have a chaplain, like at most clubs, and you can talk to these people. And if you have an issue, whether it's your sexuality or pressures at home, finance, whatever it may be, there are people you can talk to.
Ady's touched on it earlier, that players moving in different circles. I think players, and our game is much more cosmopolitan than it was many years ago. Do you think that helps with the attitude of players? You know, if we compare it to that sort of dressing room that you were in, John, do you think that helps, that players are, as I say, much more cosmopolitan than they have been in the past?
Yeah, I do. I think because the acceptance of gay people in society, the roles that they have, the positions they hold, it's much more just commonplace. It's just one of those much more open, discussed, accepted situations. And therefore, because it's so relevant and it's so there for everybody to see, the players are also in the environment. They'll be going out socialising in London, in Manchester, in Birmingham, wherever they may be. So I just feel that the whole thing has changed to a point where you talk about Gareth Thomas. You know, in a way, he was, you know, the macho man, the hero. You know, such a hero for Wales rugby. He's come out. His profile, you know, in many ways, has been enhanced because people say, "Well, hey, good well done to him. Yeah. Good for you. You're brave. You're honest. You've come out. You've confronted it, and you know, you look a better person for it." So you would hope that any footballer that did that would also actually benefit from getting the problem off his back, you know, and feeling that relief, sense of relief of being honest and being able to actually be honest with himself and honest with his family and come out. But I think, yeah, totally different environment we live in today. And the players are seeing that in everyday life, whether they're out socialising with friends and colleagues. Joey Barton coming out and saying his uncle's gay. It's just one of those things that is...
You follow his tweets, obviously.
Well, obviously, of course, yeah, religiously.
Yeah, but John has touched on it, and when you look and see the impact the anti-racism campaign had, going back to say '93, and John mentioned about this minority, and I used to say that it was a significant minority that almost drowned the voice of the masses in terms of saying we just won't accept this. But until the campaign came out, they didn't really have a voice. On something like this, Ady, do you think, you know, what message would you give to the people within a stadium to say, you know, this is a campaign that the fans, People are going to go matches up and down the country. What would you say to them in terms of creating an environment where somebody feels they can be themselves, whether they be gay or otherwise?
Well, you'd like to think that the supporter, the fellow in the street, would back the campaign and accept it. You know, we've all played in football matches where the abuse has been absolutely horrendous. So I think the football clubs have got to stand up and be counted. I think they've got to sign up to it as well. I think they can do a lot, you know, at their football club to educate their supporters. And, you know, if there is a very, very small minority that are not accepting it, if it was to be the case, then they have to come down heavy and make an example. And, you know, I believe that all 20 Premier League clubs have signed up to this campaign, which is fantastic news. Let's now get the rest of the Football League clubs, remaining 72 clubs to sign up as well.
And within the ground rules of clubs, I mean, it is an offence, you know, homophobic chanting as well as any other sort of abuse. Yes. And, you know, you'd hope that the clubs and the police would enforce.
Well, that's the key issue, isn't it? You've got to know where the boundaries are. The fans have got to know what's acceptable, not acceptable. They've got to know the consequences, and those have got to be enforced. It's as simple as that. So it's got to be a very clear set of rules to start with. As well as that, you want football players, football clubs, the FA signing up to the charter, the club signing up to the charter. There's got to be a common consensus and a groundswell of everybody saying, we absolutely accept this, we absolutely agree it, and let's move forward together in the philosophy of it, but also understand where the rules are and what disciplinary action takes place. If you're in the crowd and you're chanting abuse, there's no place for it. You're banned from the game, banned from the terraces. You don't go to the games anymore, and there's action taken against you.
But Brendon,
you've got to know that.
You say it's an offence. We know that there's, you know, week in, week out, Saturday afternoon, it's an offence to use foul and abusive language.
Yeah.
There's 20,000 people do it week in, week out, you know, yet they remain inside the stadium.
I think there's almost like an acceptance that industrial language, let's call it industrial language, is almost acceptable within society. But I think with regards to the campaign, the anti-racism campaign, people have been empowered now. They know they've got helplines. They know they can report things in a safe environment. They don't have to be pointing out during the course of a game, which can cause problems. CCTV are in there. They can pinpoint those offenders. You know, the clubs have got the right to sort of ban them from the grounds. And then we have the Football Offences Act that can, you know, can enforce it and ban them from football for a period of time. And I think that is the confidence that you'd want to have in terms of dealing with something like this, this homophobia in the game. But I think one of the things out there is people think that there must be loads of gay footballers who are almost intimidated by coming out. Do you think that they're...
Wouldn't have a clue.
What's the main thing? What's the main thing for you? What do you expect from your teammate?
What do I expect from my teammate? Yeah. Well, I expect him to play well. I want to be with somebody who knows what playing for the team is all about, who's not selfish and greedy and is talented, and I want to be successful. I always wanted to be successful playing football. So you want teammates who are equally as focused and talented and... So
your sexuality, private life,
race, nothing... whatever it is totally irrelevant to me.
And do you think that is a view you think most footballers would share nowadays?
Definitely, yeah. I really do believe that, you know, as harsh and as ruthless and as brutal as the dressing room is, it can be quite a comforting place as well, where people do talk to each other. You know, John was saying about the crazy game in Wimbledon. We always think you couldn't survive in there for 10 minutes without your tie being cut off or your shoelaces being ripped out, whatever it may be. But I imagine John has got 1,000 stories where the lads, you know, maybe something's not quite going well for somebody. Sit down, let's have a cup of tea and a chat.
Yeah, I can guarantee you, if you asked pretty much every player one-on-one, there wouldn't be a single issue. They would appreciate it, they would accept it, they would say, I don't have a problem with it. Ask them collectively in a dressing room, and people will hide behind not coming and being at the forefront in a dressing room. The great thing about Wimbledon was we confronted every issue, we had it all out on the table, we'd sit on a Monday morning, we'd go through it.
Yeah, but you were mad.
Well, it was, but that was the strength of that dressing room. I mean, Bobby Gould would go and have a punch-up with Dennis Wise if he'd had a row with him on the Monday morning about the game on the Saturday.
What about management? What do you think the view of management would be?
One of acceptance. I think managers now, I mean, you know, I'm trying to rack my brains in the managers that I've played for over the years. And I imagine, as John said, society's changed, and along that, acceptance has changed. So maybe 15, 20 years ago, 100%, you know, different.
Because actually, without saying, there would be nervousness. I think there would be nervousness from the dressing room. Would be nervous that suddenly this issue becoming so high profile might actually undermine the potential success that the team's got. So suddenly the speculation's all on that player. Everything else, is that going to jeopardise what we've got here?
But is that not? Is that
the manager certainly would?
Is that not another issue that a manager has to deal with in terms of the dynamics of the dressing room, in terms of preparation? And it shouldn't be a deciding factor that, oh, hang on a minute, this lad's come out, irrespective if he's a good player or not, I want him out.
It would be like that to start with. It would be an issue. 5 years, 10 years down the line, you'll have moved on and thought, like people smoked in a pub. You cannot imagine what it was like walking into a pub now and having smoke filling the room. So it's got to change. When it changes, yes, there's nervousness, there's issues. You move on. 5, 10 years later, you look back and you think, what a bizarre world we lived in when that was a problem and an issue within the game and society.
The thing
but
is,
it takes a long time.
We always seem to sort of talking about when we were playing 15, 20 years ago. But the problem is, Brendon, not so long ago, you've got some high-profile people coming out with some ridiculous statements. That it's almost 2 steps forward, 1 back again. And let's be honest, we could do without those.
What about the issue of the officials? The people, the referees and the referees' assistants. What about there's an issue surrounding them and somebody came out and talked about their sexuality? How do you think that will be received? If
I'm being honest, probably not as accepting if a high-profile footballer come out. I think referees have got a job, a very, very tough job to do anyway. They're often, the centre of some outrageous chanting, depending on which team you're supporting, depending on what decision they've just made. So I think that would be difficult. I really do. But just like why don't we see more black managers? Why don't we see more lady officials? Everybody has their right, and a referee, a high-profile referee, or even a lower league referee decides to come out, then we should accept that. We should back it. But the answer to your question, I think it would be tougher for the individual being a referee.
Well, there's one view. I mean, we've had female officials. We had a very high-profile case with her decisions coming under scrutiny. Do you follow Ady's line there? Do you think it'd be very difficult for an official?
I think it would. I think it's all on different scales. Very, very difficult for an official because of the abuse they already take. They're an easy target, and sometimes the crowd are going to pick on the easy target or the easy issue or the ignorant issue. It's just interesting. I think it has to change. As and when it happens, it's going to be as I said before, a very, very difficult phase. But you look at the gay acceptance, the acceptance of gay people in the arts, music, media. It's just taken for granted now. But it wasn't no less difficult for them to come out in the first place 10, 20, 30 years ago. And in a way, you talked about this is the last taboo in football. Football is also probably the last to really embrace and make it a place where people can actually come out in it. So it is very difficult. I totally agree with Ady that a referee's, if he came out, that would be leaving himself incredibly exposed to ridicule or abuse or whatever the chanting may be.
But if the game was really to be supportive and create an environment where we're saying, look, we're not going to have that sort of disrespect. We respect officials. Clubs put something out there about being respectful. Do you think that would not create an environment, not immediately, but in the near future, where we change in the mindset of supporters, of the spectators who come to our game?
Absolutely, I'm very optimistic. I think you change the habits, you change the environment, the support mechanism, the general consensus of everybody signing up to the charter, as the Premier League clubs have, as the FA are leading the process. Fantastic. In time, that will all change in the support of the players. It's a collective nature of how to move this forward and change where we are today to where we hopefully are very quickly. And I think the steps that have been taken, the charter and the way it's been drafted and everything about it, will help massively in that process.
Do you think football's lag behind in terms of addressing this problem? Or one of the criticisms of football about the anti-racism campaign is that football dragged its feet for a long, long time before addressing it.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair argument and a fair point and criticism about football, that it can be slow to embrace change. It can be slow to confront issues where every single box has to be ticked before a paper can be released or a statement can be made, or sometimes things are very obvious and football has to embrace that. But as I said before, there's a nervousness, there's a reluctance somewhat, because who's going to stick their head above the parapet to start with? And I think there's a general reluctance of that because it's such a macho sport still.
So if one high-profile player was to come out, you think many players would follow?
I personally do, because I think that they actually would come out with it with a lot of credit. Their reputation would be enhanced. They might well have a difficulty and have a real difficulty in the dressing room, and the terrace chanting would be abusive. That would have to be stamped out. The support network is much better these days. So yeah, it's going to take one hell of a brave player to do that. But in the meantime, what generally all players have to do, I think, as equally as the boundaries and the sanctions and everything have to be in place for the crowd, the players have to embrace this. The top players have to absolutely come out unanimously, and I would imagine they would want to.
What are the benefits, of coming out? Because you said if you do come out, it's going to be hard, it's going to be awkward, there's going to be a nervousness. So why come out?
I think it's about the individual. It's about the individual, and when you read stories, I remember reading about Gareth saying that he felt he was almost living a lie, and there was such relief when he came out. So I think this is about the individual. It isn't just about the sport. It's about the individual. And I think you're trying to create an atmosphere where people feel more confident that if they want to live the life, whatever that life may be, that they will be accepted for what they are. And even though I've just said about football lagging behind, do you think should football take a pat on the back now that they're looking to address it, head on, with the support of the clubs and knowing I'm sure the players will be right behind it? Do you think it's a positive step?
Without a doubt, definitely. And like I say, with the 20 Premier League clubs backing it, hopefully the Football League clubs, follow suit. And I totally agree with what John said. The players of today now, the modern day player, they accept things a lot more comfortably, if you like, than maybe 15, 20 years ago, because there is peer pressure.
And I think that's the essence of the Charter. It's all about empowering the individual, isn't it? It's all about giving them the platform to feel comfortable in life, that they can live their life true to themselves. It's not about other people, it's about yourself, having the confidence and having the network and the support and everything in place for social inclusion on every level. That's what we want. We want a socially inclusive society on racism, on homophobia, whatever it may be. And I think that's the essence of it, as you say. It's the individual who wants to feel comfortable that they can make their own choices.
On that positive note, I'd like to thank you both for your contribution, and we wish the campaign well.